And it's my pleasure to be here today to talk with you on the topic of why we in the U.S. should care about Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I'd like to thank the organizers of this teach-in, everyone involved, the logistical people, staff, and especially Sarah Phillips, who is the principal organizer of this. What is a teach-in? There is no simple answer to this question. For some, it is a campus setting outside of normal classes where professors offer guest lectures in a grand metaphorical classroom, sharing their expertise with students at large and with the broader public, a very important function. Many of my colleagues, I'm sure today and in the days to follow, will approach today the sessions in this teach-in in this way, and the expertise that they share, I think, is invaluable. I brought my wrong glasses for this. I could do something similar, for there are many academic topics relevant to the invasion of Ukraine about which I might speak. Just war theory and what it says about the justification and method of the invasion. The way different kinds of moral theories, utilitarian, deontological, pragmatic, existentialist, aren't you impressed that I know those terms? How they shed light on how we might think about our moral duties. The intellectual history of arguments about Russian imperialism or national independence or the power of the democratic idea. These are important topics. It would be possible for me to approach this talk by sharing some measure of expertise on these topics or some other one, but today my approach will be somewhat different, more polemical, more provocative, and more political. The format of the teach-in is commonly regarded as having begun at the University of Michigan in 1965 as part of the broader New Left protest movement against the Vietnam War. The famous anthropologist Marshall Solins, then a young professor at Michigan, is widely regarded as the principal organizer of the first teach-in in the United States, along with a group of fellow professors and students. The original teach-ins were genuine intellectual forums in which concerned professors shared knowledge and perspective in dialogue with students, but they were also genuinely political events, not organized by university and departmental leaders, and indeed often organized in tension with university directives, and designed to articulate a definite political stand. I will speak here in the spirit of those kinds of events, expressing a definite point of view. Of clarification, I believe it is very important for teachers to avoid proselytizing and polemics when teaching their course materials to students in their classrooms. I would not teach a class in the manner of the talk I intend to give today. But this is not a classroom. And students here, you, mostly you, are adults and citizens, and it is as a citizen as well as an academic that I'm speaking to other citizens who, even if younger than I am, are fully capable of making their own sense of their situations and their own value commitments and acting accordingly. So my purpose is to convince you that basic considerations of freedom and democracy and ordinary civil life itself are at stake in current events. It occurs to me that probably most of you know this. That's why you're here. And at the same time, I want to really highlight certain important value choices at stake and maybe provoke you to think about Ukraine and also more than Ukraine. So, why should we care about Putin's invasion of Ukraine? Before I begin, I must emphasize that I am deliberately speaking of Putin's invasion because it is Vladimir Putin, the president and quasi-dictator of the Russian Federation, who has launched the invasion. While he has much support in his country, though it is hard to gauge this support because there is neither a free press nor free elections in Putin's Russia, while he has support, there are also many Russians who doubt the wisdom of this move or strongly oppose it. Some of them are bravely protesting the war as we speak. They may be sleeping now, but soon they will wake up and again protest. Putin is a dictatorial ruler of an authoritarian regime, and he made this decision pretty unilaterally, and the over 100,000 Russian troops who are in fact in the process of invading Ukraine are carrying out his orders. It is not Russia that is responsible for the invasion, it is Putin and his small leadership group. So, again, why should we care about Putin's invasion of Ukraine? My answer is simple. We should care because of who we are, what we care about more generally, and what we believe. But who are we? That is the central question about which I now will speak. In doing so, I will eventually arrive at my own answer to the question of why we should care. But first, I want to outline two very different ways of thinking about this. Here is the first. If we are a people who believe that the greatest problem facing us today is the endangerment of white Christian culture by nihilism, Marxism, liberalism, and gender ideologies that promote LGBTQ rights and undermine the traditional family, if we believe those things, then we should care about Putin's invasion and we should support it. Because Putin has long claimed to stand against these ideas and in defense of traditional, white, Christian, manly civilization. If we are a people who believe that the world today is being overrun by a nefarious cabal of capitalist financiers and Marxist intellectuals led by George Soros, the rootless cosmopolitan Jew who founded a liberal university in Budapest, Central European University, and who donates tens of millions of dollars to human rights groups around the world, if we believe this, then we should care about Putin's invasion and we should support it because Putin claims to be fighting these very things, and indeed he does fight these very things. If we are people who believe that liberal democracy itself is a sham, promoted by talky liberals and angry Marxists and critical race theorists who wish to destroy our nation, disparage our history, and humiliate us, then we should support the invasion. If we believe that the fate of our world lies in the hands of great leaders who alone can save us, leaders like Putin and Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Modi in India, and Orban in Hungary, and Trump in Mar-a-Lago, then we should support Putin's invasion. For he claims to be the greatest leader of them all, and many of the others, including Trump, seem to agree. If we believe that war alone keys up human energies and sets the seal of nobility on those peoples who have the courage to face it, that the heart of nations and the spirit of a people elaborated down through the ages in its language, customs, and faith is more vital than weak ideas of human rights and international justice, that while political doctrines pass, nations remain, and that the imperialist spirit, the tendency of nations to expand, is the manifestation of vitality, and if we believe that the renunciation of power is the characteristic of dying peoples, if we believe these things, then we should celebrate the fact that Putin is invading Ukraine. For Putin believes in the greatness of the Russian nation and its right to lead a Eurasian empire against the forces of darkness, and he believes in the shedding of blood and the conquest of soil in the name of higher values, and he believes that it is his historical destiny to lead this project of Russian greatness. Please note, some of you may have already noticed, the words I quoted above were not from Putin, but from Benito Mussolini's infamous 1932 manifesto, The Doctrine of Fascism. But the sentiments are very similar to the sentiments long extolled by Putin. And they have also been articulated by the man widely considered to be Putin's intellectual guru, Alexander Dugan. Dugan, a celebrant of the writings of Julius Evola, an Italian fascist philosopher, promotes the idea of Russia as a Eurasian power that stands against the decadence of the West and is duty-bound to fight against it. Dugan has been one of the strongest supporters of a Russian invasion of Ukraine for years, once stating that the Russian Renaissance goes through Kiev. In his influential 1997 book, The Basics of Geopolitics, Dugan writes, in principle, Eurasia and our space, the heartland of Russia, remain in the staging area of a new anti-bourgeois, anti-American revolution. The new Eurasian empire will be constructed on the fundamental principle of the common enemy, the rejection of Atlanticism strategic control of the USA, and the refusal to allow liberal values to dominate us. Dugan has indeed been quoted as having posted the following words on his Facebook page. I want to be really clear. He's been quoted. That has been wiped from Facebook. I think, I can't verify this, but I'm going to share with you the quote anyway. The other quotes, I think, the other quotes are documented. This one is not. We should clean up Ukraine from the idiots. The genocide of these cretins is due and inevitable. I can't believe these are Ukrainians. Ukrainians are wonderful Slavonic people. And this, the people leading Ukraine, is a race of bastards that emerged from the sewer manholes. To be clear, Dugan believes that it is necessary for Russian power to defeat and destroy these idiots and bastards from the sewer. He is talking here about people like Vladimir Zelensky and the current government of Ukraine and the people who support it. He believes it's necessary for Russian power to defeat them in the interest of true, authentic, wonderful Ukrainians, real Ukrainians, who understand that their destiny is to be part of a pan-Slavic empire ruled by Russia. Now, if we are a people who like Dugan's ideas and agree with him that Putin is a man of greatness capable of advancing these ideas, then we should care about Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and we should not only support it, we should celebrate it. Many self-styled fascists or sympathizers of fascism throughout the world like Dugan's ideas. One of them is Steve Bannon, the chief influencer of Donald Trump, who was present at the beginning, the very beginning of the Trump administration, and at the very end, where in the days preceding and following January 6th, he organized a war room with Rudolph Giuliani with the purpose of overturning the Democratic election of Joe Biden. The close ties between Bannon and other important Trumpists, specifically Sebastian Gorka, Mike Flynn, and Paul Manafort, the close ties between these people and the Putinist ideology have long been documented. Bannon has long praised Dugan, and Dugan has returned the favor, recently referring to Bannon as his soulmate. Bannon, one of the most popular influencers in the right-wing digital ecosphere, has praised Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So too has Tucker Carlson and a range of other influential right-wing pundits at Fox News. Laura Ingraham. Last week, one of Trump's strongest supporters in Congress, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, spoke at the America First Political Action Conference in Florida. In her speech, she said nothing about Putin or Ukraine, but she did denounce Biden. And more important is this news report, which has been widely verified. I'm going to read a short section. Some of you may have heard or read this when this took place. This is a reporter for New York Magazine who was there reporting on this. The Georgia congresswoman's appearance was introduced shortly after the leader of this conference asked for a round of applause for Russia, and the crowd chanted, "Putin, Putin," in response. In her remarks, Greene hailed the attendees as canceled Americans and delivered a familiar set of attacks on abortion, environmentalism, Nancy Pelosi, and Justin Trudeau. Other speakers at the event made an array of racist, homophobic, and anti-Semitic remarks, culminating in Fuentes, that's the leader of this group, reiterating his praise for the January 6th attack on the Capitol as awesome, and arguably celebrating Adolf Hitler. He said of the media, and now they're going on about Russia and Vladimir Putin as Hitler. They say that's not a good thing, he said with a smile. They, the liberal media. Trump himself, along with his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, issued very public praises of Putin last week while the invasion was underway. As the blood has flowed in recent days, both have very mildly walked back their comments, denouncing the invasion of Ukraine, but not recanting their praise of Putin. Trump has doubled down on his praise of Putin. Indeed, Trump has used the Ukrainian crisis to reiterate the lie that Biden stole the election and is an illegitimate president, and that only he can deal properly with Putin. And by the way, Trump's claim that Biden's election is a coup is exactly the claim that Putin is making about Zelensky's election. He describes it as a coup. Trump and his many followers have spent years raising up Putin and indeed collaborating with him. We must not forget that the Mueller report documented extensive interactions and collaborations between the Trump camp and the Putin regime during the 2016 campaign. By the way, that report was buried, and we can have interesting discussions about what were the implications of that report and whether, in fact, charges should have been filed on the basis of that report. Charges were not filed. But there's no question that that report provided damning evidence of connections. They might not have been criminal. They were very evident. We must not forget that Trump was impeached by the House the first time for using aid to Ukraine as leverage to pressure President Zelensky to smear Joe Biden. And that behind this effort were connections, were networks between people like Manafort and Giuliani and Putin-leaning Ukrainian elites. Trump and his closest associates have not opposed the invasion. They have spoken out of both sides of their mouth on it, all the while praising Putin and drawing obvious affinities between strongman Putin and strongman Trump. Meanwhile, they echo some of the rhetoric that Putin has invoked to support the invasion. I'm now going to read you, again, these are headlines. I'm trying to provoke you, okay? Obviously, you're adults who can think for yourselves. Read on. By the way, on my blog, I'm going to give citations for the things I'm saying, but like, this is just a talk. You don't have to take my word for anything. These headlines that I'm now going to read are indicative, okay? This is Alex Shepard in the New Republic last week. Trump and his Putin apologists blame woke Democrats for invasion of Ukraine. By the way, that's based on lots of tweets and statements. Salon's Kelly McClure reports that Donald Trump Jr., Ben Shapiro, and Steve Bannon ride on the back of Putin's war to speak out against LGBTQ plus inclusion. And by the way, a main theme of Putin is anti-gay. It's one of his central themes. And all of the Trumpists are extolling this, and they are claiming that, let's just say people like me, are just trying to like overrun the entire society with gayness by criticizing Putin's invasion. Yeah, obviously I'm doing that right now. Okay. Now, The Atlantic's David Graham offers the best overall account in a piece entitled Putin's Useful Idiots, arguing that too many Republican leaders are serving as Putin's mouthpieces and too many others are afraid to speak out strongly against this. I highly recommend these pieces. All of them contain lots of hyperlinks and citations, quotes from these people that say these things. I'm not making this up. Now, if we are people who believe that Trump is the rightful president of the United States and that we need an American Putin who can work together with Putin to hold back the tide of liberalism and Marxism and critical theory and black women on the Supreme Court, then we should welcome Putin's invasion. Now, to be clear, this Trumpist position has created real awkwardness for many Republican leaders, many of whom have sought to distance themselves, even in subtle ways, from Trump on this issue, denouncing Putin invasion while simultaneously denouncing Biden. By the way, Mitt Romney has been incredibly outspoken and brave, and he hasn't been doing that, and I admire what he's been doing. The Republican Party, of which, in that party, Mitt Romney is a total outlier. The Republican Party is split on how far to go in denouncing Putin, but it is united on the need to attack Biden at every turn. Now, if we are people who believe that the defeat of the Democratic Party is the moral imperative of our time, then we should care about Putin's invasion and welcome it because it has occurred on Biden's watch, and it can be used to weaken him and his party in the 2022 midterm elections and the 2024 presidential elections. So yay. If we are such a people, we should welcome this invasion. Now, it is clear then that there are many reasons why we should care about the invasion and welcome it if we are supporters of a far-right agenda of attacking liberal democracy and promoting a new traditionalist nationalism, which some intellectual proponents have taken to call national conservatism. I should probably look in the camera at least sometimes, for my mother's sake. But is that who we are? Is that who you are? Is that what we as a people, Americans, a civic nation, a body of citizens joined together by a civil society and a constitutional democracy, is that who we are? I hope the answer is no. I'm going to be 65 in a few months. And never in my lifetime have I been racked by so much doubt and so much fear about the answer. I hope the answer is no, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure who we are. I'm not sure what we as a country believe. I'm not sure what we as a civic nation support, whether we are, even in the barest of senses, a civic nation anymore, whether we are serious about pluralism, inclusion, and democracy. But if we are serious about freedom and inclusion and pluralism and democracy, then we ought to care very much about Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and we ought to do everything within our power and within reason to oppose the invasion. We should oppose it because it represents a violation of our core political and human values, and because very powerful people in our own country, including Donald Trump, the likely presidential candidate of the Republican Party in 2024, and I remind you that Biden's approval ratings are like rock bottom, and it is quite likely that the Republicans will retake the House. It's quite likely that the party that supported the January 6th insurrection will retake the House in 2022. And it's quite possible that Donald Trump will be reelected president in 2024. I didn't say it's like certain. It's not certain. We don't know. Just like we didn't know that Putin would invade until he invaded. Okay? But the fact that the leaders, many of them within the Republican Party, are sympathetic to Putin and his invasion, and that they employ the same tropes in this country to support attacks on democracy that Putin invokes in his country, that should give us pause. That's a reason for us to care. There are too many parallels. There are too many connections. Now, it should be obvious to you. I think it's pretty obvious that there has been a groundswell of opposition to the invasion, at least in some segments of this country, and in many parts of the world. We shouldn't exaggerate. That's a great term to use, a groundswell. Most people, even in Bloomington, honestly do not give a shit, okay? Maybe 300 people will go to Sample Gates. That's not a groundswell, really. But there's substantial opposition that has formed, and it has grown, and I think it will continue to grow, and hopefully it will be exaggerated by the media. The media has done a great deal to raise up authoritarian leaders. Hopefully the media will call attention to the fact that some people are opposing this invasion. I think the opposition will grow as Putin becomes more and more violent, and the more and more obstacles he faces to the invasion, the more violent he will become. And we should care. Now, there are many reasons why people here, where many of you perhaps, have objected to this invasion from the start, but especially as we see, how incredibly violent it is, and now it's starting to get really violent, and bombardment of cities, etc., civilian areas, bombing of radio stations, the killing of civilians. But even from the start, there are many reasons, I think, why people have objected. The sheer brutality and destructiveness of human life, of property, and of institutions is one. And there's no question that Putin aims to destroy institutions. The refugee crisis that it has caused is another. There are perhaps 1 million Ukrainians who have fled their country. This is an international school. This is an international program. And there may well be refugees here. There are certainly refugees in this building. I personally do not know what it is like to be a refugee, although members of my family were refugees. And in fact, my grandmother was a refugee from Ukraine in 1905. But I cannot imagine what it is like to run away from your home and your neighborhood and everything and like run for 9 hours west to get out of your own country. I cannot imagine. But there are at least 1 million people who have already been doing this. Now, the danger that the invasion poses to bordering nations and the dangers of escalation into a conflict with NATO, this is something to be concerned about. Putin's threats to use nuclear weapons are something to be concerned about. If we are a people who care about our world, we cannot afford to not care about the invasion of Ukraine. We must care about the invasion of Ukraine, and we must oppose it. We should care because the invasion is causing serious harms to many millions of people, and we should care because the people who support it are people who we should not wish to support. In thinking about this, we can do worse than to revisit a much-quoted passage in Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous letter from Birmingham jail. Most famous for its discussion of civil disobedience, the essay leads with an equally important, very powerful response to the clergyman who basically said to him, "Why are you here? You're not from here. Why don't you go home?" And King, at the very beginning of this very famous letter that I'm sure many of you have encountered, starts by explaining why he, a non-resident, not a resident of Birmingham, nonetheless cares about Birmingham and nonetheless has come to Birmingham to support its citizens at a moment of crisis. This is what he wrote. I'm just going to read very briefly. You probably have read this. Several months ago, he says, the affiliate here, he's talking about the Birmingham affiliate of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that he led. Several months ago, the affiliate here asked us to offer guidance and support to their democracy campaign, and also requested that we be on call to engage in nonviolent direct action if such was deemed necessary. We readily consented, and when the hour came, we lived up to our promise. So I, along with several members of my staff, I'm here because I was invited here. I am here because I have organizational ties here, but more basically, I am here because injustice is here. And now this is the famous part that you probably have heard. I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by at home and not be concerned about what happens here. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live within the narrow provincial outsider agitator idea. Anyone who inhabits the world can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. That was King. Now, who are we here today who should care about Putin's invasion of Russia? Who should deplore it, fear it, oppose it? First, we are participants in a major university in a global republic of letters. And we are participants in a university that has ties everywhere in the world with scholars and students who care about academic freedom so they can do their work and who care about freedom so they can live their lives freely. They're everywhere. They're in Ukraine. They're in Poland, Romania, the Czech Republic, Belarus, Moldova, Russia. We are participants in a major university in the global republic of letters, and we are citizens of the world's largest constitutional democracy. Many of us know Ukrainians whose lives have been placed in danger, and they have reached out to us. How many people here know Ukrainians? Does anyone know Ukrainians? A reasonable amount of people. Okay. You certainly know Ukrainians, people who know Ukrainians. And Kevin Bacon actually knows Ukrainians. And you're not that disconnected from him. That was a joke. Okay. Many of us know Ukrainians. They've reached out to us. Many of us know Poles, Romanians, Slovakians, and Moldovans, whose countries are now the front line in the effort to provide humanitarian relief to over 1 million Ukrainian refugees fleeing their country. And they are reaching out to us. By the way, how many people here know Poles or Romanians or Slovakians or Moldovans? Those are the border countries. How many? Okay, whatever. Many of us know Russians who are braving harsh weather and the harsh tactics of a police state to protest Putin's invasion and Putin's authoritarianism. They are reaching out to us directly, personally, like the ones I know are reaching out to me. They're reaching out to our professional associations. They're reaching out to some of our programs. I'm sure they've reached out to Sarah Phillips and REI. Our university and its many departments and programs have organizational ties with Ukrainian universities and academic institutions and scholars and students. Institutional, organizational ties. They're not just there, and we're here. And in the age of the internet and digital communication, we're literally in instantaneous communication. We collaborate, we co-author, we participate in Zooms. Our country, the United States government, has organizational ties with Ukrainian institutions and with the Ukrainian government, with whom it has long had diplomatic relations and who it considers an ally. The Ukrainian government, the elected government of Ukraine, which is now hiding and fighting, is a government with which our government has organizational ties as part of world politics, diplomacy, the UN, etc. Our nation, the United States, our country, is the principal force behind NATO, which is pledged to defend the borders of member states neighboring Ukraine, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, and the nearby Baltic states. I have many friends, particularly in Romania. I know, some of my friends here are from Hungary. They have friends, family, whatever. These people are terrified that there might be a war that extends beyond the borders of Ukraine. They're terrified that Putin's talking about tactical nuclear weapons. They assume it's tactical nuclear weapons and not intercontinental ones, but we don't really know. Our country has 90,000 U.S. troops permanently stationed in Europe, most in Germany, as part of its commitment to NATO. Biden has moved some of them to the frontline states in recent weeks. This is an organizational tie. In my class, some of my students are here, we talked a little bit about this, and some people shared with, how many of you have people in the service? In the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines. In fact, maybe not many people in this room, but like in the student body of this university at large, the undergraduates, a lot of them. They know people, we know people, who actually may be putting their bodies on the line. And some of them are already putting their bodies on the line because of this invasion, which was unprovoked. If we are a people who cares about these things, we must regard the invasion of Ukraine as a dangerous violation of international law, human rights, and peace in the region. And it must be countered, and it must be reversed. I'm almost done. We are citizens of a constitutional democracy. Ukraine is a constitutional democracy. Ukrainian democracy is relatively recent. It is imperfect. And it is the form of government that most Ukrainians want. They took to the streets for it in 2004 and again in 2014 to insist on their right to a democracy. Putin seeks to destroy this democracy. And he is a leader of a transnational network of authoritarian leaders that hates democracy and seeks to replace it with a more nationalist and authoritarian form of government. If we care about democracy anywhere, we must oppose this. Because the injustices that are now being committed on Ukraine by Putin's invasion are a threat to justice everywhere. And because we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, and Vladimir Putin is pulling the strings tight around the throats of Ukrainians and around our throats, trying to suffocate our freedom and our democracy, and to replace it with autocracy. It is up to us to do everything in our power to support Ukrainians in defense of their democracy, I said within reason, by speaking out loudly, by contributing generously to civil society organizations that provide on-the-ground relief to vulnerable Ukrainians, by supporting Russians who are speaking out loudly against their autocratic ruler, and by pressing our government to do everything possible short of direct military intervention to support the legitimate government of Ukraine and the citizens that support the legitimate government of Ukraine, by further sanctioning Russia, by providing assistance, logistical support, humanitarian relief, and arms. Reasonable people can differ about what mix of policies might best support Ukraine. A lot of interesting stuff has been written recently about the likelihood of a move to civil resistance. It would be terrible for NATO to be involved in a military confrontation in Ukraine. But there's a lot that can be done by us and by our government to oppose this invasion. And if we Americans are a people who care about freedom, including our own freedom, then there is no question that we ought to care deeply about the violence that Putin and his government and its army are inflicting on the Ukrainian people, and we ought to do everything we can to oppose it. Thank you. I'm happy to talk with you guys, and it's so weird that I'm not wearing a mask now that my momentum is ceased. Anyone have questions or comments? Or disagree with me, or want to ask me something, or? Yes?
How to respond to people who says we don't have to care too much about the war happening in Ukraine, so we don't either have rights or obligation to care about it, because that's not happening here, not happening in our country?
Well, as I've said, again, here and there are connected in a great many ways. And I don't think it's really, now, particular individuals. So there are people who say, who the hell cares about them? Okay? And the fact of the matter is, even they probably should care more than they do because they have people in the service. But the fact of the matter is, I suppose the question is, do we care about democracy and do we care about human rights? I don't think there's a simple, economistic answer to the question of why people should care. And Biden is going to talk tonight, no doubt, about how the sanctions regime is probably going to have some impact, negative, in the very short term, on the pocketbooks of some ordinary Americans. That's a fact. There's no way around that fact. And so to some extent, it's a value-based claim. But the other part of it is this. It's not just we should care about, because if we love democracy or care about it, we should care when someone attacks it in Ukraine. The same people that are attacking it in Ukraine have also tried their best to undermine it here. And the more they win, the more we lose if we care about democracy. The more our democracy is placed at risk. And by the way, there's also then, all the other European democracies, which in some ways are on the front line of this, and are also absorbing now, tens, hundreds of thousands of refugees. They're paying a price much more than us. But ultimately, there are people, a lot of them, who don't want to hear me. And quite honestly, I don't really want to talk to them. I'm not going to persuade them. But I'm hoping to reach a sufficient number of people to make a difference. And what needs to be done is there needs to be a political pressure behind this. Is that a kind of an answer to your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you think that the unity of the West is unprecedented, and do you think this is a strong moment for democracy?
In many contexts, I'm very skeptical of this rhetoric of West versus East or North versus South. And I think it has some very unfortunate consequences, even when thinking about the fact that, what do you make of the people in the streets of Moscow or St. Petersburg protesting? Are they Western or not? They're in the East. So to some extent, that said, the Western alliance seems to be hanging very strong together, and I actually think Biden's efforts have played a big role in this. Is this good for democracy? In the short term, If it contributes to rolling back the invasion, I want to say yes. But I don't think that this is necessarily good for democracy. There's some jingoism behind it in some quarters. And it's also true, it's very interesting. The governments of Hungary and Poland, which are not really liberal Democrats at all, are supporting NATO at this moment. I think they feel like they have to. And so they are also being challenged in their own countries by liberal Democrats. And I think they're going to possibly be strengthened by this. Is that good for democracy? It's not good for democracy in Poland or good for democracy in Hungary. So I think the way that it's good for democracy is it's a very complicated question. At the same time, in the short term, yes. And that's basically my position about everything, like not just the Ukrainian question. In the short term, holding back an authoritarian force is good for democracy. It's a defensive effort. It doesn't really necessarily advance or deepen, but it holds back. Okay, there are a lot of problems with Ukrainian democracy. And some people on the left are like, well, but it's really a corrupt oligarchy. Yeah, and we're a corrupt oligarchy. Would you rather be the corrupt oligarchy where, like, I'm going to say, fuck Donald Trump and I'm going to go home and have a beer, or be the corrupt oligarchy where I'm going to say, fuck Vladimir Putin and I'm going to be in prison? Which oligarchy you want to live in? I mean, seriously, there are some fundamental differences. In a piece I wrote last week that I published, I quoted from Albert Camus. He was writing about the Cold War, but he was writing about opposing the Soviet invasion of Hungary in 1956. And he said, we support a half-truth or even a quarter-truth against a lie. And the lie is the Soviet invasion of Hungary, he says. Western liberalism is not the truth. Maybe it's a half-truth. Maybe it's a quarter-truth. But he said it's the quarter-truth of liberty. I believe that. Other questions, thoughts? Yes?
Sort of related to that, actually, what do you make of like the kind of like wishy-washiness of the DSA's statement on this, with the sort of like, maybe the USA should go to.
Okay, the question is, what do I make of the position of Democratic Socialists of America? So, very briefly, I don't know, like, I'm not sure if you're feeding me like an answer. So I grew up in New York. I was a student and teacher of Michael Harrington, a student and friend, and then I was a colleague. I taught in his department of Michael Harrington, the founder of Democratic Socialists of America. I was an early member of Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee. I was never like an organizer, but I was a member. And I'm on the editorial board of Dissent. And I rejoined DSA after many years, after Trump was elected in 2016. But that I can't belong to that organization. So what do I think of it? I think that they really have their heads in the sand on this issue, and it's politically stupid, but it's also just morally deplorable, in my opinion. Now, Jacobin has actually published some very strong pieces against the invasion. I think Jacobin has been more open to critique than DSA has been, and maybe even than The Nation has been. So there's an interesting range of opinions among individuals and publications on the left, but I don't even pay attention, honestly, to what DSA says anymore. Like, I'm a huge supporter of AOC. Some of the political figures connected to them I think are wonderful, but I don't really care what, I personally, they're not important. So that's my answer. Are you involved with DSA?
I'm on some mailing lists.
Yeah. I'm on the mailing list too, even though I told them to please take me off it. So if anyone here curates that list, you can take me off. I mean, some of the stuff you do is good. I wish you all the best, but like, it's not for me. Other questions or comments? I feel so vulnerable here, maskless. All right. Well, look, so I have a blog called Democracy in Dark Times. And I also publish regularly at a platform called Democracy Seminar, which has been publishing a lot of great stuff about what's going on in Ukraine. Great stuff, not just by me. I mean, I'm not even thinking about my stuff. And anyone who's interested in emailing me, I'll send you the links to that, okay? And if you're interested in like more information, I can provide information and support for some of the things I said. And I'm happy to like talk to people about this. Actually, except for this, like all I do on campus is teach my class with a mask and go home. I only meet with students on Zoom. Hayden, I've never seen like in person ever. Hopefully before he finishes his dissertation, that will happen. But I'm happy to talk with people. It's nice. Thank you for listening.